Did you know there's such thing as a hybrid tea? This tea is a combination of a black tea and an oolong tea, and in this video, we're going to be seeing what it tastes like. Let's dive right into this Hong Oolong tea from Taiwan. Okay, so what we have here is a Hong Oolong. So this is a hybrid tea. It's actually kind of a mix between an oolong tea and a black tea. And it's coming to us from Taiwan, and this is a really unique tea for me. I've never had a Hong Oolong before, and I actually wasn't even sure there was such a thing as a hybrid tea before trying this one. I thought that if it were an oolong, it couldn't be considered a black tea and vice versa. But I was just informed that if it shares similar characteristics in the production process to both a black tea and an oolong, it's considered to be a hybrid tea. So this one right here is a perfect example of a hybrid tea. It's a heavily oxidized oolong. So a black tea is a fully oxidized tea, an oolong tea is a partially oxidized tea. And within oolong, it's a very diverse category because it can be almost completely unoxidized, it can be almost completely oxidized, and depending on the level of oxidation, you'll have all sorts of different flavor profiles existing within the same tea type of oolong tea. So this one is going to be on the heavier oxidized side. You can see the leaves are very dark. One of the ways that you can tell whether an oolong is unoxidized, not very oxidized or very oxidized, is just by looking at the color of the leaves. So the lesser oxidized oolongs are going to be green, and the heavier oxidized oolongs are going to be brown or even close to like black in color. And in addition, a lot of the heavier oxidized oolongs are also charcoal baked, so this can also influence the flavor and the color of the leaves as well. So this has a 3-minute brewing time, which is a little bit long for me, so I actually started the brewing right before shooting this video. So it's been brewing for about 3 minutes already. I'm using 7 grams of leaves and probably about 120 milliliters of water. And I'm boiling this one. So I'm using full boiling water, just a little bit under boiling, so probably like 95 Celsius water for this tasting. You can see the color is very dark. Very dark color here. Brown, maybe a little bit orangish. And while I'm tasting this one, I'm actually going to start the next brewing, because the next brewing is 3 minutes as well. So you'll see this oolong follows the ball shape pattern. So the leaves are really tightly packed in. These are older tea leaves, so they're quite large and they're really densely packed into these ball shapes. You can see them starting to open up a little bit here. I can show you later what they look like when they're fully opened up. But it's very interesting to see how much this tea expands, because oolong in particular is a very densely packed tea. So let's go ahead and take the first tasting. Oh wow, it's exactly what I would expect. The flavor is in between a black tea and an oolong tea. The first thing that jumps out to me is the kind of minerality of the tea. So it tastes very similar to like a Dansang oolong, something that's grown in very kind of mineral-rich soil. So you can really taste the minerals in the tea. It's almost like if you've ever, I don't know, licked like, it's kind of weird, but if you've ever had an experience licking like a slate or something when you're a kid maybe, and you have this really intense mineral taste. It's not really quite a taste, it's more like a mouth sensation. It's like a tingling on the palate, and this is something that you get from these mineral heavy oolongs, like the Dansang oolongs, but I'm also getting it with this tea here. So a little bit smoky, a little bit, not quite smoky, but a little bit roasted, very mineral rich. There is some sweetness to it. It's kind of almost like a maple syrup sweetness, but very, very weak. It is subtle, but it's still there. And one more flavor profile I notice is it has this kind of berry tang to it. So it's a little bit tangy. It's like kind of has a similar taste to like kind of like a blueberry, like you know how a blueberry is sweet, but it has a little bit of that tart finish to it. That's what I'm getting from this tea here. So I'm going to go ahead and pour out the second brewing. And this is sometimes where these oolongs come alive, is the second brewing, so definitely don't throw out the leaves. You shouldn't throw out the leaves after one brewing, but particularly not with oolong, because, I think from my experience, the second brewing is actually the best. So the first is like a little bit lighter, and then you really start to get into the body of the tea, some of the more stronger flavor characteristics of the tea in the second brewing. But let's go ahead, because I mentioned the leaves. Let's take a quick look at them. You see, like, this is a perfect example. So this leaf was once packed into one of these tiny little pellets, so it's really expanding. And it's interesting to see because you just put a tiny little layer of these pellets on the bottom of the teapot, and then they expand and they really fill up the whole volume of the teapot. So when you're if you're eyeballing it, it's best to use a scale if you're not used to these ball oolongs, because they're much denser than you think. So you may, if you're used to something like sencha or something, or even like a white tea, which is very loosely packed generally, and you kind of have an idea of what 5 grams is, and then you try to translate that to oolong, you're going to end up using way too much. So with these ball rolled oolongs, definitely use a scale if you can. And second brewing is definitely much sweeter. It's more into these kind of molasses or syrupy notes. It's a little bit darker, like I mentioned before, and that tang is definitely still there. So it has kind of like even a stronger like berry tang in the finish, I would say. Very good. I really like the flavor of this tea. I guess my only criticism would be that the flavor is a little bit weak compared to both an oolong and to a black tea. Even with kind of a heavier brewing, like a harder brewing with high temperature water, high leaf to water ratio, longer brewing time, I'm still not quite getting the flavor that I would with like a dansang, for example. It's kind of, I think that's just because the tea is in the middle. It kind of shares characteristics with both a black tea and an oolong tea. And I think because it doesn't lean too strong in one direction, the flavor appears to be weak by comparison. So it's a very good tea. It's a little bit subtle. I think it's unique that you have kind of this berry tang to the tea. It's something I haven't quite experienced in other teas, where you kind of have this like almost like sour berry finish to it. So that's a unique element of the tea that I appreciate. But overall, I think there are plenty of oolongs and black teas that I've had that are more flavorful. But overall, this is a very good tea. I'm really glad that I tried it, and I couldn't be happier. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this tasting of this Hong Oolong tea, this red oolong or black oolong. Hopefully I can do more tastings like this in the future, where I explore teas that I'm not really accustomed to. Normally we specialize in Japanese green tea specifically. We travel to Japan to meet with farmers and source some of the best organically grown teas in the world. And this is a new experience for me, trying these oolong teas, these black teas, and everything in between. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope to have more videos like this in the future, and I'll see you next time.